Farmers depend on tractors for power, endurance, and safety. Yet history shows us that not every machine lived up to that trust. Some rolled over without warning, others failed when brakes gave out, and a few carried fatal design flaws from day one. These are the 15 tractors banned for fatal failures. Number 15. Belarus MTZ-50. By the mid-1960s, the Soviet Union wanted a tractor that could symbolize mass mechanization as much as it could plow fields. Out of the Minsk Tractor Works came the Belarus MTZ-50, a machine exported across Eastern Europe, Asia, and even into parts of Africa. It was cheap, rugged, and simple to repair, which made it a lifeline for collective farms. Yet that same simplicity hid flaws that would make it notorious, and in some countries, restricted or banned outright after fatal accidents mounted. The MTZ-50's naturally aspirated diesel engine delivered steady strength for long shifts. Displacement measured 4,450 cubic centimeters, equal to 271 cubic inches. On flat ground, this power seemed manageable, but on slopes or with heavy trailers, it became treacherous. Because the tractor lacked rollover protection and carried a high center of gravity, a single misstep could send it tipping violently, a pattern behind many deaths reported in rural accident studies. Over time, operators learned that its rated output of about 55 horsepower made it far stronger than its compact frame suggested. That mismatch encouraged farmers to hitch implements too large for the chassis, worsening instability. Torque peaked near 190 pound-feet, a figure that gave the MTZ-50 impressive pulling force, but also produced sudden jerks when traction failed, throwing drivers off balance with little chance to recover. Even transport between fields carried risk. With a top speed approaching 19 miles per hour, the MTZ-50 moved faster than most contemporaries. Yet its basic braking and steering systems, we were not designed for that momentum. Runaway incidents on hillsides became a grim feature of its history. In later decades, regulators in Poland and other European states began restricting or banning Belarus tractors that did not meet updated safety standards, citing both emission compliance and operator hazards, effectively forcing many MTZ-50s off legal roads and fields. For a generation of farmers, the Belarus MTZ-50 was a workhorse, but its legacy also includes overturned wagons, runaway descents, and crushed operators. It stands as an early example of how power without protection can push a tractor from trusted tool to banned machine. Number 14. Same Buffalo 130. In the late 1970s, Italy's SAME company introduced a new generation of heavy-duty tractors aimed at both European and export markets. Among them stood the Buffalo 130, a striking blend of aggressive styling and mechanical muscle. It promised modernity, raw pulling strength, and all-wheel drive control. Yet beneath that bold exterior lurked safety oversights that would later place it on lists of restricted or banned models in certain regions. The problem wasn't that it lacked power, it was that it didn't know how to handle it safely. The Buffalo was built for serious fieldwork, and farmers were eager to push it to its limits. With a diesel engine built for endurance, the machine held nothing back. Displacement was measured at 6.1 liters, equal to 372 cubic inches. That size gave it unmatched torque at low revs, which proved ideal for tillage and heavy transport, but also made it dangerously reactive under stress. Power delivery reached close to 125 horsepower, a figure that made the Buffalo feel more like a road truck than a traditional farm tractor. That much force in a frame with limited stability controls often proved unforgiving. In many rollover cases, especially while cornering with raised implements, the tractor's weight distribution shifted violently. Operators were caught off guard, and with no built-in rollover protection on early models, the outcome was often fatal. Torque values climbed toward 300 pound-feet, giving it outstanding pulling ability for its size class. However, when traction gave way, particularly on slopes or rain-soaked clay, the same torque snapped back against the driveline, sometimes twisting axles or bucking rear attachments. Reports of broken joints and sudden mechanical lockups contributed to its growing reputation for unpredictability. Even simple road travel was a cause for concern. The Buffalo could cruise at a top speed of around 22 miles per hour, faster than most tractors of its era. But the lack of modern suspension and limited brake modulation meant that braking hard at speed often sent the tractor skidding uncontrollably. Several countries later tightened road use restrictions on older SAME models, and in some jurisdictions, insurance companies stopped covering them altogether. The same Buffalo 130 was designed to charge through fields like its namesake, but when raw force met outdated safety, the charge often ended in chaos, and in too many cases, catastrophe. Number 13, John Deere 4020. Few tractors in history were embraced as quickly as the John Deere 4020. By the late 1960s, it had become a cultural icon across North America, the machine seen in advertisements, farm shows, and almost every county fair. Success brought prestige, but it also magnified the darker truth, because when a tractor this common carried fatal flaws, the consequences spread across thousands of farms. One of the biggest issues came not from weakness, but from strength. The diesel engine, with a displacement of 6.6 liters, equal to 403 cubic inches, gave farmers the ability to attempt jobs their older tractors had never managed. The temptation to push boundaries was constant, and when it met uneven fields or heavy hitch loads, the 4020 too often tipped with deadly force. Accidents multiplied as its rated horsepower climbed close to 95 horsepower. For the average operator, this seemed like a gift, allowing them to haul implements designed for much larger frames. Yet the tractor's design left it top-heavy, and on rolling terrain, even a simple turn could transform raw capability into a rollover that crushed everything in its path. Stories from the era speak of sudden jolts in soft soil, a direct result of torque that peaked near 250 pound-feet. That force, while useful for dragging plows through clay, reacted violently when traction failed. A snap in the driveline or a lurch in the rear wheels often left drivers helpless, pinned in open cabs that lacked any protective rollover structures. Even the transport duties that made it versatile carried hidden danger. With a top speed near 19 miles per hour, the 4020 raced ahead of its contemporaries, but steering precision and braking power lagged far behind. Country roads became scenes of accidents, where weight and momentum overwhelmed control, reminding everyone that faster did not always mean safer. The John Deere 4020 may still be celebrated as one of the most influential tractors of all time, but its influence came at a price. Widespread adoption meant widespread tragedy, making it a legend shadowed by the scale of its own failures. So far, we've looked at engineering mistakes that cost more than just money, but we're just scratching the surface. The next tractors caused outright bans. Hit like and smash subscribe, because it only gets more dangerous from here. Number 12, Mahindra 475Di. In dusty village lanes across India and Africa, the Mahindra 475Di often arrived as a savior. Its bright red paint and rumbling diesel meant one thing: a small farmer could finally haul as much as his wealthy neighbor. But within a few years, that same sight became linked to overturned wagons, shattered axles, and ambulances on dirt roads. The tractor's story is not just about work done, but about the cost of power given without protection. Operators learned quickly that the engine never seemed to tire. Displacement measured 2,730 cubic centimeters, equal to 167 cubic inches, which gave it stamina far beyond its frame. Instead of slowing down, farmers added more load, more passengers, and more trailers, pushing the machine into situations it was never designed to survive. On paper, its output of about 42 horsepower looked ordinary, yet in practice it turned the little tractor into a restless beast. Without the ballast or safety structure of larger machines, the Mahindra could rear backward under strain, flipping in seconds while plowing or climbing embankments. Rural newspapers carried grim photos of accidents, and local governments began warning or restricting its use in certain public works contracts. Torque told the same story in another language. At roughly 110 pound-feet, the pulling force was ideal for deep tillage, but when wheels spun on wet clay, that torque kicked back like a mule. With no cab and no roll bar, even a slight misstep left the driver exposed to the machine's full weight. Even travel between fields added its own twist. Moving at about 16 miles per hour, the Mahindra's brisk pace felt liberating on long roads, but steering and braking, designed for low-speed farm work, struggled with that momentum. More than one accident report described the tractor skidding into canals or market stalls. The Mahindra 475Di gave smallholders the muscle of giants, but it also handed them the giants' risks without armor. Its legacy is not only of affordable horsepower, but of lessons written in overturned soil and shattered trust. Number 11, Massey Ferguson 135. The Massey Ferguson 135 was never meant to be a giant. It was small, affordable, and designed to give first-time tractor owners a reliable machine for light to medium farm work. For many, it was their very first step into mechanized farming. That simplicity was its greatest strength, but also the reason so many fatal accidents were tied to it. The danger came not from breakdowns, but from stability. Early models were sold without rollover protection systems. On flat fields, this was rarely an issue, but once the tractor was driven on uneven ground, even minor slopes could turn into death traps. Thousands of rollover deaths across multiple countries in the 1970s and 1980s were linked to tractors in this class, and the 135 was among the most common. Its three-cylinder diesel engine displaced 2,520 cubic centimeters, equal to 154 cubic inches. It delivered steady output, but the relatively narrow wheel track meant the power was not matched with balance. Add a rear-mounted plow or a loaded trailer, and the tractor could flip backward with little warning. Horsepower output stood at roughly 45 horsepower. That was enough to tempt farmers into demanding tasks like pulling oversized implements or hauling on steep tracks. In such conditions, the combination of modest weight and surprising power made the tractor unstable. Operators were often caught off guard by how easily a job could go from manageable to catastrophic. Torque reached around 120 pound-feet, a figure that provided reliable pulling ability. But when traction failed, that torque reacted violently, creating sudden jerks that could throw the driver off balance. With no cab, no restraints, and no protective frame, survival often depended on luck. Transport duties added their own risk. With a top speed of about 12 miles per hour, the tractor could move quickly between fields, but outdated braking systems meant it could not always stop in time. Fatal collisions with wagons and roadside obstacles were not uncommon. The Massey Ferguson 135 was eventually restricted in some regions under updated safety codes. Its legacy is twofold. It made mechanization accessible to small farmers worldwide, and it exposed how deadly affordability could be when safety was treated as optional. Number 10. Fiat 780 DT. The 780 DT was one of the company's headline models, especially in export markets. It offered four-wheel drive and more pulling power than earlier Fiats of similar size, and that combination made it an instant success. But as the decade closed, the very features that sold the machine were linked to a rising number of serious accidents, prompting new restrictions and retrofit requirements in several countries. Instead of being underpowered, the tractor was unusually strong for its frame. Its four-cylinder diesel engine had a displacement of 3,670 cubic centimeters, equal to 222 cubic inches. That size was enough to keep it working all day without complaint, but it also meant that a relatively light chassis was being asked to handle far more stress than older designs ever faced. On slopes and with heavy implements, that mismatch frequently led to loss of control. Farmers used the 780 DT to do jobs normally reserved for larger machines. With output near 78 horsepower, the tractor could drag large plows or haul multiple wagons at once. In wet or uneven ground, that power translated into sudden wheel lift or sideways slides. Early production units lacked built-in rollover protection structures, leaving the driver completely exposed when the tractor tipped, a hazard that accounted for multiple fatal incidents cited in European farm safety reports. Even on the road between fields, the problem persisted. The Fiat could travel at higher speeds than earlier Fiats of similar size, but its braking and steering systems were still designed for slower work. With a full load behind it, stopping distances became dangerously long. A single misjudged corner could send both tractor and trailer into a ditch or onto oncoming traffic. As safety standards advanced in the late 1980s and 90s, governments and insurers began refusing unmodified units for public contracts or road licensing. The Fiat 780 DT moved many farms forward in productivity, but it also became a symbol of how extra power without matching safety can turn a trusted tool into a prohibited risk. Number 9. Ursus C360. The C360 was designed as a practical successor to the C355. Farmers valued its straightforward mechanics and relatively low running costs. The tractor's reputation for durability kept it on the market for years, but alongside its popularity grew a long record of accidents that eventually made it one of the models targeted under stricter safety laws. The issue was balance. The C360 was lighter than many of its competitors, and its frame design left operators vulnerable when the tractor was driven on slopes. Rollovers became a defining problem. Without factory-fitted rollover protection, operators had no margin for error. Many of the fatal accidents recorded in Eastern Europe during this period involved tractors of this size and configuration, with the C360 often listed among them. At the mechanical core was a diesel engine with a displacement of 3,100 cubic centimeters, equal to 189 cubic inches. It gave steady endurance, but the strength it produced was not matched with modern safeguards. On uneven ground, the extra strain could quickly tip the tractor beyond recovery. Rated at around 52 horsepower, the C360 offered more pulling ability than earlier models, which led operators to hitch larger implements than the frame could safely handle. That mismatch created instability in transport and tillage alike. Torque reached close to 140 pound-feet. In firm soil, this was an asset, but once traction gave way, the recoil pushed the tractor violently. Drivers often had little chance to react, and with no protective cab, the outcomes were often fatal. Even its road use was risky. With a top speed of roughly 18 miles per hour, the tractor could travel quickly between fields. But drum brakes and mechanical steering were not adequate for such speeds. When combined with a trailer load, runaway incidents and collisions became a regular concern. By the time modern safety codes were enforced, older Ursus C360 tractors without rollover protection were increasingly banned from road service or official contracts. It remains remembered as a farmer's ally in affordability, but also as a stark reminder that simplicity without safety carried deadly consequences. Number 8. Eicher 241. Across small farms in India, Nepal, and beyond, the Eicher 241 became one of the most recognizable machines of the late 20th century. It was inexpensive, light, and simple to repair, qualities that made it the first tractor for thousands of families. But what looked like progress at first glance later revealed safety gaps that could not be ignored. The machine's limitations in stability and protection contributed to a record of accidents that placed it under scrutiny as safety regulations toughened. The tractor relied on a single-cylinder diesel engine, which gave it the endurance smallholders demanded. Displacement was 1,557 cubic centimeters, equal to 95 cubic inches. This compact engine kept running costs low, but its size also meant the tractor was light and carried little ballast. On uneven ground, that lightness turned from a benefit into a liability, as the machine's balance could be unsettled with only a modest shift in load. Despite being rated at just 25 horsepower, the tractor was often worked beyond its intended scope. Farmers used it to pull oversized wagons or climb embankments with heavy trailers. In those conditions, the narrow track and short wheelbase increased rollover risk. The absence of rollover protection systems on many units meant accidents frequently ended with fatal results. Torque output hovered near 70 pound-feet, enough for light plowing and short-haul transport. But when traction broke, especially in wet clay or sandy soil, that torque reacted unpredictably, jerking the tractor suddenly. Operators sometimes found themselves ejected from the seat before they could respond. The tractor's modest top speed of about 15 miles per hour seemed safe enough, but poor braking performance made road accidents a persistent hazard. Farmers transporting goods on narrow rural roads found that the Eicher 241 could not always stop when pulling heavy trailers downhill, a situation that led to numerous collisions. As newer safety standards spread in the 2000s, unmodified versions of the Eicher 241 without rollover bars or structural reinforcements were increasingly excluded from official use and, in some jurisdictions, banned from road registration. For many farmers, it was once the first step into mechanization, but it is remembered now as a machine that showed how affordability without safety could come at a deadly cost. Number 7. Zetor 6911. In the late 1970s, Zetor introduced the 6911 as part of its UR1 series, promising more power and modern design for farmers pushing the limits of older tractors. Rather than being relegated to scrap, many of these machines were eventually restricted or banned from certain public contracts because their risks could no longer be ignored. From the start, the 6911 was built around a 4-cylinder diesel engine. Displacement reached 3.6 liters, equal to 219 cubic inches. That was solid for its era. and gave the tractor power to pull heavier loads than many comparable models. But beneath that capability lay a mismatch between power and stability, especially when pressure mounted in hilly or wet fields. When pushed, the machine delivered about 65 horsepower. That was enough to tempt users to hitch implements beyond safe limits. In many documented accidents, the tractor tipped during tight turns or when shifting weight. The design's center of gravity and wheel track offered little forgiveness to mistakes. Torque figures quoted by machinery sources cite a torque of around 46.1 pound-feet. In everyday use, that torque felt adequate. Yet when wheels lost grip on mud, slopes, or clay, the torque rebound could twist the chassis unexpectedly, jerking the tractor sideways. Some operators caught in these events had no chance, especially when no protective cab or rollover protection frame was present. On rural roads, the 6911's weight and momentum exposed further weakness. Its brake and steering systems, built for farm pace rather than transport speed, often failed to match real-world conditions. In downhill stretches with load, the tractor sometimes overran its brakes, leading to collisions or drives over embankments. In time, rising safety regulations in Europe and elsewhere began excluding unmodified Zetor 6911 units from public tenders or official road licensing. Those lacking reinforced frames or modern safety updates were effectively banned from formal use. The 6911's ambition and rugged build carried many farms forward, but its legacy also includes a catalog of fatal failures that teach a lasting lesson about harnessing power responsibly. Number 6. Kubota L175. In compact tractor circles, the Kubota L175 was praised as a nimble all-rounder, light, maneuverable, and suited for small farms. But underneath that practicality, a few latent vulnerabilities turned into real danger when the machine was asked to do more than it safely could. In certain situations, these weaknesses resulted in accidents severe enough that some operators and regulators began treating unmodified units as too risky for public leasing or heavy contract work. One weak point was steering reliability. Over time, wear in the steering components can introduce play that erodes control, especially under load or on uneven terrain. Reports from service manuals and forums mention excessive steering play, making the tractor difficult to guide at speed or when towing heavy implements. When control is marginal and weight shifts, the machine can lean into imbalance. The engine is a 3-cylinder diesel unit with a displacement of 1,670 cubic centimeters, equal to 102 cubic inches. That modest displacement is sufficient for many chores. But when paired with substantial attachments or trailers, the tractor's mass ratio becomes less forgiving. With added weight and tow, even a small imbalance may trigger a torque recoil or lateral drift that tips the machine. Though published horsepower figures for the L175 are modest, that strength is deceptive. Under heavy drag or uphill loading, operators often push it into steep gradients or tight contours, and that is when its limits appear. The torque output, while not extreme, is enough to make slack in the drivetrain feel sudden under loss of traction, jerks that can shift the machine off-center. On roads, the L175's braking and steering systems were designed primarily for low speeds and farm tracks, not for full loads at transit speed. That mismatch allowed for runaway incidents under load on farm roads, especially where descent slopes existed. Any failure to modulate braking or excessive inertia in trailers would amplify the danger. Over time, stricter machinery safety norms required rollover frames, better control systems, and stricter stability metrics. Many older L175 tractors, lacking structural reinforcements or upgrades, were refused for contract work or road approval. Its reputation became mixed, reliable for light chores, but vulnerable under demands it wasn't meant to meet. An example of how versatility can be dangerous unless matched by safety. Number 5. Allis-Chalmers D17. With its bold styling and new features, it was marketed as a serious upgrade over earlier row crop tractors. In many ways, it delivered, offering increased horsepower, a longer wheelbase, and optional power-adjusted rear wheels. But its design also exposed a critical gap in operator safety. Over time, that gap contributed to a pattern of fatal rollover incidents, forcing agricultural agencies and insurance regulators to reassess where and how the D17 could be legally operated. At the center of the machine was a reliable 4-cylinder engine, displacement came in at 4,370 cubic centimeters, equal to 267 cubic inches. This engine gave the tractor long hours of dependable service, but it also introduced a new threshold of force that wasn't always matched by its physical design. The frame sat high and narrow, especially in the row crop configuration. Without ballast or a roll bar, the tractor's center of gravity was vulnerable to even minor shifts in load. Its output reached approximately 63 horsepower, a significant leap from earlier models in the D series. While that allowed the D17 to operate heavier implements, it also meant operators were frequently working at or above the machine's stability threshold. Field reports from the 1960s and 70s documented incidents where tractors flipped backward while pulling stuck implements, or during aggressive acceleration in low gear. Torque delivery was another critical factor. At peak, it delivered around 190 pound-feet, which was ideal for deep plowing and tillage work. But when working on sloped terrain or wet fields, that torque could cause sudden weight transfer and unpredictable lurching. Operators with no cab or rollover protection had few options to recover. Its top road speed hovered around 16 miles per hour, which was typical for the time. However, when loaded with rear attachments or trailers, the braking system struggled to maintain control on downhill stretches. Multiple accident reports from state agricultural safety boards noted the D17's tendency to fishtail under braking or tip when trailers jackknifed. As tractor safety standards evolved in the late 20th century, the Allis-Chalmers D17 began to fall out of regulatory favor. Machines lacking rollover protection were denied public contract eligibility in several states, and liability concerns led some insurers to stop covering them entirely. Number 4. Sonalika DI-753. In many Indian districts, the Sonalika DI-753 has become a go-to tractor for medium-scale farmers. It's dependable, capable, and seen as an upgrade over smaller utility machines. Yet, as use spread into steeper land, heavier trailers, and more continuous haulage tasks, its inherent safety limits emerged, and in some regions, unmodified units faced bans or exclusion from certain government contracts because the risks proved too high. When pushed beyond its design envelope, the tractor sometimes failed in surprising ways. Its four-cylinder diesel engine carries a displacement of 3,707 cubic centimeters, equal to 226 cubic inches. That capacity gives it strength, but the balance between power and structure was marginal in tough conditions. On slopes or side hills, the chassis could become unstable, especially when combined with loaded wagons or steep backing maneuvers. Farmers often used the DI-753 with gear ratios that let it maintain momentum over rough terrain, relying on its rated output of 55 horsepower. In ideal conditions, that horsepower delivered consistent performance. But when soil turned slick or implements snagged, the machine would lurch unexpectedly. In dozens of field-level accident summaries, that kind of sudden motion was tied to rollover events. Torque also played a role in exposing the tractor's weakness. Its peak torque, specified at around 173 pound-feet, pushed the rear wheels hard in low traction zones. When wheels slipped, the sudden rebound could tilt the rear end outward. Without factory-fitted rollover protection in many units, a sideways tip proved fatal. Even road use added risk. The DI-753 was capable of moderate forward speeds on farm lanes, but its brake and steering systems weren't engineered for heavy loads at those velocities. Drivers transporting goods uphill or downhill often found brake fade or steering slop, leading to collisions, runaway trailers, or loss of control. As safety regulations tightened, some Indian states and contractors began barring older DI-753 tractors lacking rollover frames or reinforced structure from government projects or certified road use. What once was a trusted workhorse became controversial in parts where lives mattered more than output. Number 3. Fordson E27N Major. With greater power and versatility than its predecessors, it helped mechanize agriculture during a critical period. Yet with that reputation came an equally lasting association with accidents, rollovers, and operator fatalities that eventually saw the tractor sidelined as safety standards advanced. The Major's engine design reflected its ambition. Displacement measured 4,450 cubic centimeters, equal to 271 cubic inches. It gave farmers a level of stamina that older Fordsons had struggled to deliver. But the increased power rested on a frame that did not address the growing concerns of operator safety. As more torque reached the rear wheels, instability became a frequent hazard on sloped or soft ground. Output figures hovered around 35 horsepower, a number that pushed the tractor into jobs once reserved for larger machines. Unfortunately, its weight distribution was not forgiving. Operators working with heavy rear implements frequently found the front end lifting, a dangerous situation that could escalate into a backward flip. Without protective structures, many accidents proved fatal. Torque itself was not overwhelming by later standards, but the way it was delivered magnified the risks. Sudden loss of traction, particularly in wet soil, caused abrupt jolts that shifted the tractor's balance violently. Operators caught in those moments often had little chance to recover. On rural roads, the Major was capable of modest speeds, but braking and steering were basic, suited more to open fields than narrow lanes. With a trailer attached, the lack of control became evident. Reports from the period described tractors sliding off embankments or jackknifing when loads shifted unexpectedly. As agricultural safety regulations were introduced in the post-war decades, machines like the Fordson E27N Major were among the first to be excluded from official contracts or banned from road use without significant retrofits. It remained popular for years, but its dangers made it a symbol of how progress without protection can leave behind a deadly legacy. Number 2, Ford 8N. Farmers saw it as affordable, versatile, and simple enough to repair in a home workshop. Its presence expanded rapidly, reshaping small and medium-sized farming. Yet the same traits that made it appealing also hid design flaws that placed operators at risk. Over time, those flaws contributed to fatal accidents and restrictions on its safe use. The 8N was fitted with a 4-cylinder gasoline engine, whose displacement was 2,000 cubic centimeters, equal to 122 cubic inches. For its size, this engine delivered surprising strength, which encouraged owners to push the tractor into demanding tasks. That eagerness often backfired. With a relatively light frame and high center of gravity, the tractor proved unstable when pulling heavy loads or operating on uneven terrain. Its output hovered near 27 horsepower. Modest by modern standards, this was still powerful enough to create problems. Farmers frequently reported backward rollovers when implements were improperly hitched above the rear axle. In such cases, torque shifted the tractor's balance upward, flipping the machine in seconds. Without rollover bars or protective frames, many of these incidents ended in tragedy. Torque delivery measured around 92 pound-feet. This was sufficient for plowing and cultivation, but when traction failed, the sudden recoil often caught drivers unprepared. On muddy fields or steep inclines, a loss of grip could cause abrupt sideways movement, leaving no time for correction. The danger was magnified by the absence of any structural shielding around the operator's seat. Even road use carried hidden risks. The 8N could travel at speeds up to 15 miles per hour, fast enough to reduce travel time between fields. Yet its braking and steering systems were built for low-speed fieldwork. With trailers attached, stopping distance stretched alarmingly, and several fatal runaways were documented on rural roads. As agricultural safety standards tightened, unmodified Ford 8Ns were among the tractors most frequently flagged as unsafe without protective retrofits. Number 1, David Brown 780. The story of the David Brown 780 is not just about engineering, it is about lives cut short. In Tasmania, a farmer was killed when his tractor rolled down a slope. A tragedy made even more haunting when investigators discovered that the same machine had taken his father's life decades earlier. That accident led a coroner to recommend that tractors built before 1982, including the 780, be banned from use without modern protections. The design that made the 780 affordable and versatile also left it vulnerable. It carried a 3-cylinder diesel engine with a displacement of 2,650 cubic centimeters, equal to 162 cubic inches. That engine was efficient and durable, but the tractor's lightweight frame and narrow stance meant stability was often compromised. On sloping ground or with poorly balanced loads, a small miscalculation could become catastrophic. Power was rated near 46 horsepower. For a utility tractor of its day, that was more than enough to manage plows, trailers, and light construction duties. Yet, it also tempted operators to use the tractor beyond its safe envelope. When hauling heavy wagons uphill, the front end sometimes lifted suddenly, flipping backward in a matter of seconds. Torque values hovered around 122 pound-feet. On firm soil, this provided dependable pulling strength. But when traction broke, whether in wet clay or during sharp maneuvers, the release of torque made the tractor jolt violently. Many operators seated without a cab or rollover protection were thrown into fatal accidents they had no chance of surviving. Road use proved just as hazardous. With trailers attached, the braking system lacked the capacity to bring the tractor to a stop on steep descents. Agricultural manuals of the era explicitly warned drivers not to attempt sharp turns or risky slopes, an acknowledgement from the manufacturer that the limits of the design were known even then. The David Brown 780 was once celebrated for helping smaller farms mechanize, but its legacy has been rewritten by accidents and bans. From fields to farmyards, these 15 tractors proved that power without safety can be deadly. Got another dangerous machine we missed? Drop it in the comments, hit like if you learned something new, and subscribe for more.